Yeah, I'll eat a whole pumpkin pie. Oh, hello. It's James with William Painter. Listen.
Feedback mechanism is broken. And so people said, you know what? Like Donald Trump cannot be worse than what we're dealing with right now. And if you turned on cable news today, why would you think that Donald Trump won in 2016? Russia. Republicans is probably a direct answer. So Russia's on the list. What else?
Job loss.
I wish it was more centered on job loss. That made me happier.
We're not going anywhere.
No, so according to cable news, what do they think? Russia, emails, Hillary Clinton, Facebook, the FBI.
Kenya.
Oh, wow. You watch a different cable news network right now. So you get this set of explanations from the news programs, but to me, I'm a numbers guy. And the numbers tell a story where we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs that were primarily based where? Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa, all the swing states that Trump won. And you all actually lost tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs right here in New Hampshire. It just happened a little bit earlier. It happened a couple of decades ago in the north of the state where a bunch of your mills started closing. And a lot of those areas were devastated and did not recover. And I spent 7 years working in Michigan, Ohio, and Missouri, and I saw that they also have not recovered from the loss of these millions of manufacturing jobs. And unfortunately, what we did to those jobs, we're now doing to other jobs around the economy. How many of you noticed stores closing around where you live here in New Hampshire? And why are those stores closing?
Amazon.
Amazon, one word answer, right? Amazon's soaking up $20 billion in business every single year. How much did Amazon pay in taxes last year? Zero. So that is the math, New Hampshire. $20 billion. He's looking at me like, is that right? He's like, that can't be right. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Refund.
$20 billion in this every year, and they paid zero in federal taxes last year. That's not unusual. They pay zero and near zero taxes most every year. Most common job in New Hampshire is retail clerk. The average retail clerk is a 30-year-old woman making between $9 and $10 an hour. So if 30% of your Main Street stores and malls close, what is her next move going to be after the store closes? Welfare? Yeah, like it's somewhat unclear. McDonald's, how many of you have seen a self-serve kiosk in a McDonald's or fast food restaurant? Yeah, they're going to be in every McDonald's in the country in the next 2 years, 2021.
Horrible.
Food service and food preparation, third most common job in the economy. And it's not just McDonald's, and it's not just the front of the house. They're actually starting to target the back of the house. Get some robot burger flippers and fry cookers and the rest of it.
Where's my first job?
That was your first job, right? Where is your first job? Right. Yeah, my first job, I was a busboy at a Chinese restaurant. And that's probably still a job. I don't think they're automating that away. So you ask if you're observing, you're like, busboy, not waiter? And, and it's true because my Chinese was too poor to translate food orders to the kitchen. And so that was the test to be a waiter. It's like, if you tell me chicken and broccoli and I can actually write that stuff in Chinese and give it to the kitchen, I couldn't do that. So they were like, busboy. True story. Yeah, I feel strengths and weaknesses as a busboy. So weakness is Chinese, strengths English. I'd help people out. Literally, like their kids went to school with me, so they'd be like, "Hey, you're my kid's stuff." Like, that's right. And anyway, other strength. I had a driver's license, and most of the other workers did not. So one time, the boss said, "Hey, you can drive," and he gave me the keys to the bus to refuel, and it was the most terrifying, 10 minutes of life driving that bus to refuel it, because I was 16, 17 years old driving a bus. You didn't want to say no to the boss. The boss refuel this thing, and I was like, okay. So, I take the bus out of the road, terrified of killing somebody. I come back an hour later, and he was like, "Why did it take you so long?" And I was like, I drove 5 miles an hour. Anyway, so that was my first job. The question is, what happens to the first job in the future? When the fast food jobs get automated away. When you all call the customer service line of a big company and you get the software, you probably do the same thing I do. You dial 000, say human. How do I do that? Yeah, we all do that. Yeah, that software is terrible. You're like, how's it going? What can I do for you? It'll be fast, seamless, a little bit sexy, perhaps. You might not even need software. What's that going to mean for the 2.5 million call center workers in the United States who make $14 an hour right now? I talked to 70 CEOs in New York City, and I asked, how many of you are looking at replacing your back office clerical workers with AI and software? Guess how many hands went up out of 70? All of them, all 70. The fact is, you could fire that CEO if he didn't have his hand up. And I say his, most of them were guys. But we have a system, essentially, where if they are not actively looking to replace those workers with a cheaper alternative, then they get fired, because they get just judged by the bottom line every single year. So these are the changes that drove many people to vote for Donald Trump. And the biggest coming down the pike is self-driving trucks. How many of you all know a trucker here in New Hampshire? Driving a truck is the most common job in 29 states in this country. There are 3.5 million truckers. Average age 49, 94% men. So that probably resembles the truckers you know. And my friends in California are working on trucks that can drive themselves. The reason why they're so eager to have self-driving trucks is for the money. $168 billion a year in cost savings if they can automate away truck driving. And UPS has already invested. There are already robot trucks on the road in Arizona. Now, why Arizona? Because the robot trucks are really bad with snow. They're not testing them here in New Hampshire. This would be a very bad day for the robot trucks. That's one reason why they're always testing them in Arizona and Southern California, because the weather is very clear. But $168 billion a year is such a staggering amount of money that they're right now working on something called teleoperating equipment, where to have a robot truck function in weather like this, their plan is to beam a teleoperator into the truck and have them drive it like a video game from a warehouse in Nevada or Arizona. And they'll just be looking out of video cameras in the front of the truck. And this sounds impossible, but it's hand in hand with the adoption of 5G equipment. So 3G was when we could watch TV on our phones. Remember that?
Yeah.
The first time we did that, you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. So now we're at a point 5G where latency is essentially near zero, so they can actually beam someone in from across the country into the truck and drive it like a video game if the truck's not sure what to do, and then beam back out when the truck feels like it's confident again. What do you think the ratio is going to be between teleoperators in Nevada and Arizona and the 3.5 million truckers who currently drive a truck?
1 to 100.
1 to 100, 2 to 100. It's not going to be 1 to 1. It's talking about like 3.5 million people sitting in a warehouse being like, is there a truck that needs me? Oh, it's true. It's like, this is the economy that we're operating in. So what's that going to mean for the 3.5 million truckers or the 7 million plus Americans who work in truck stops, motels, and diners that will rely on the truckers getting out and having a meal every day? Think about the ripple effects. About 1 in 10 jobs in Nebraska, as an example, support trucking. What happens when the trucks just don't stop in Nebraska anymore? Because the robot trucks can drive 24/7. And imagine your friend who's a trucker right now who probably is a small business owner or a part of a small business. That small business owner took out tens of thousands of dollars in loans to get the truck. And imagine having that truck and then seeing a robot truck on the highway that never needs to stop. And if you're a human driver, you need to stop after 14 hours to get out and take a nap, or because that's the law. Like the truck will actually stop driving after 14 hours and force you to get out. So this is, to me, the biggest change coming down the pike. We're in the third inning of the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country, what experts are calling the fourth industrial revolution. When is the last time you heard a politician say the words fourth industrial revolution?
Only you.
Just now. And I'm barely a politician, New Hampshire. My first move was not to run for president of the United States because I'm not insane. I've got a family. It's like, hey, I see what happens. Trump wins. We scapegoat immigrants for problems immigrants have next to nothing to do with. It's a straight technology automation problem. We blasted away these millions of manufacturing jobs, and we're now eating through retail and call centers and fast food and eventually transportation. And so I went to our folks in D.C. and I said, what are we going to do? And what do you think the folks in D.C. said to me when I said, what are we going to do? It's really a fun exercise, right? You go, it's like, what do the folks do? Now, so the 3 big answers I got. Number 1, we cannot talk about that, Andrew. That's verbatim. That's leadership. Number 2, we should study this further. And number 3, we must educate and retrain all Americans for the jobs of the future. And that last one, how many of you heard a politician say that last one? Yeah, that sounds pretty good, right? You're like, oh. But then, do you all want to guess how effective the government-funded retraining programs were for the manufacturing workers who lost their jobs in the Midwest?
Not very.
Yeah, I'm anchoring you low. Who said 8? Yeah, that's a good guess, because you know. It's 0 to 15 cents. The programs are a total dud. And we're not like infinitely retrainable widgets. We're human beings. You take a 50-year-old manufacturing worker and say, I'm here to retrain you. It's like, well, this is going to work. And then you do it, and then you get a certificate, and then they walk away. And like, what's the job that awaits you after you get the certificate? Nothing. The success rates of these retraining programs are very, very low. And you see the results in communities that have lost their manufacturing job base, where drug overdoses and suicides have skyrocketed to record levels, not just here in New Hampshire, but around the country, to the point where our life expectancy has declined for 3 years in a row, the first time in 100 years that has happened. The last time our life expectancy declined 3 years in a row was the Spanish flu of 1918, a global pandemic that killed millions. We are back in Spanish flu territory right now because of suicide and drug overdoses in the United States of America. So our leaders in DC wanting to do this literally told me to, pound rocks, more or less. And one person said something to me that brought me here to you all in New Hampshire. He said, Andrew, none of us is going to do anything about this in DC because fundamentally this is not a town of leaders, this is a town of followers. And the only way we will do anything about it is if you create a wave in other parts of the country and bring that wave crashing down on our heads. And I heard this and I said, challenge accepted. I'll be back with the wave. And New Hampshire, believe it or not, you all are the wave. You all are the people that are going to rewrite the rules of the 21st century so that Amazon's not paying zero in taxes, so that we're actually participating in all the gain. They're getting sucked up by these technology companies. Now, what does the wave look like? I stand before you today. I'm in 5th place in the country in most recent polls. It's like me or Kamala. And we all know Kamala, unfortunately, is going the other direction.
Yeah.
Ending up. I say unfortunately, I'm like friendly with Kamala. I'm friendly with most of the other candidates. I'll tell you all, one of the most touching moments of the campaign for me was when Bernie told a journalist that he liked me. And I was like, Bernie likes me? It's like the greatest thing ever. And so then when I said to Bernie at the next debate, I was like, oh, thank you for saying you liked me. And then he put his arm around me and says, of course I like you, Andrew. You got a lot of good ideas to the table. And I was like, the greatest. I was like, I feel like my uncle, just like, just put his arm around it. So I'm 5th in the polls right now and rising because I've identified the real problems that are plaguing us, and I'm proposing real solutions that would actually move us forward. And I know the first time you heard the solutions, you were like, hey, there's an Asian guy running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. Yeah. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the first time you heard that, you said, wow, that sounds like a gimmick. But this is not my idea. Tom Paine was for this at the founding of the country. He called it the citizen's dividend. Martin Luther King championed this in the 1960s, called it the guaranteed minimum income. And it is what he was fighting for all Americans when he was assassinated in 1968. I actually had the pleasure of meeting with Martin Luther King's son in Atlanta after the last debate, Martin Luther King III, and he said, this is the wildest thing about that conversation. When he referred to Martin Luther King, he actually just called him Dad. He said, Dad said this. Dad believed in that. And I was like, holy crap, Martin Luther King was your dad. And then I was like, I guess that makes sense, because your name's literally Martin Luther King III. Literally meeting with you because you're his son. But he said, look, this was Dad's vision, that we needed to set a foundation for all Americans, this guaranteed minimum income. He didn't say a particular group, he said all Americans. And then one state actually passed a dividend where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked, today. And what state is that, New Hampshire?
Alaska!
And how do they pay for it?
Oil!
And what is the oil of the 21st century?
Technology!
Technology, AI, big data. Our data is now worth more than oil. Checks go. They went to Facebook, Amazon, Google, and the rest of the big tech companies are just sucking it up. They sell and resell our data to the tune of billions, and we don't see a dime. We all made the same deal. I made the same deal. Don't worry about it. It's like you signed up for the thing, and you were like, this is free. That's great. It's not free, honestly. Like how the heck are these companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars if it's free? The answer is that they're actually monetizing our attention, and we're outgunned. Like, how many of us act I agree and consent form before you hit I agree and consent? No one reads stuff. Of course not. It'd be ridiculous to read it. So you hit agree and consent, and you essentially just hope for the best. You just hope nothing too bad happens as a result, right? I actually am very curious about this. When you think that your has been hacked because there's a headline that says like, hey, like, who got hacked, or Crate and Barrel got hacked, how many of you actually change your passwords? Some of them. No, raise your hands. And then the rest of us are like, well, I only bought some comforters on that site. Like, it wouldn't be so bad. It's like, if they got hacked, like, I don't know anything too bad. I guess, like, my credit. I mean, that's the world we live in right now. And it's it's gotten to such an extreme where there's this massive imbalance. The darkest thing is, how many of y'all are parents like me? Some of you are too young to be parents, but if you're a parent like me, then you know how outgunned we are by the technology companies because our kids and grandkids are getting mesmerized by these devices and smartphones. And I talked to the folks in Silicon Valley. You know who are the best at having their kids not use technology? The people in Silicon Valley. They're like, no screens anywhere near my kids. Because the engineers of Silicon Valley know that they're getting paid millions of dollars to turn supercomputers into dopamine delivery devices and slot machines for teenagers and kids. I mean, that's the society we live in right now. And then we say, hey, it's for the parent to figure that out. I'm a parent. Like, I know it's impossible for us to somehow protect our kids from every influence, and screen, especially because when your kid's on the screen, you're like, hey, stop doing that, where you're eating or whatever it is. But half the time you're on the screen yourself because you're an adult and you have a job that requires you to answer emails all the time. And so it's impossible for you to police your kid when you're on the thing too. So we have to counterbalance this to make it so that technology actually respects our humanity. And right now, you know what technology respects? One thing, the bottom line. That's the money. Why are they maximizing the engagement on these devices? Because that's how their stock market price goes up. It's user engagement, it's advertising money, it's their stock market price. And our government is 24 years behind the curve on technology. How can I be so precise when I say 24 years? We got rid of the Office of Technology Assessment in 1995. Think about that for a second. There used to be an office that advised Congress on technology issues, and they eradicated it in 1995 because I guess they thought we'd invented everything. No, so if you think government's flying blind on technology, we 100% are. You know how we get advice on technology issues? From the technology companies. That's how dumb it is. That's how bought and sold our government is. So the wave that helps rewrite the rules of the 21st century economy to work for us starts right here. The first big step is actually making us all shareholders and participants in this economy and putting some of the gains into our hands in the form of this dividend of $1,000 a month. It seems dramatic, but after you get $1,000 a month into your hands, how are you actually going to spend the money in real life? To go beer only, right? Here in Branch and Blade. How many people are going to come here a little more often?
Yeah, but then the waitress makes money.
Exactly. No, I'm not complaining. I'm presenting this as a very virtuous example. Daycare, college and college loans, careers you've been putting off, choose, start a business. How much of it would stay right here in New Hampshire? Most all of it. Not all of it, obviously. You get your own Netflix password finally because you're tired. So some would float up. Most of it would stay right here in New Hampshire. It's going to go to daycare and Little League science.
Yeah, I'll eat a whole pumpkin pie. Oh, hello. It's James with William Painter. Listen.
1,000 each. That's right. What's the fire code in here? Let's call it 100. So there are 99 people here in this room. That's like 99,000 Californians. That's 2.5 football stadiums of Californians. That's the power of this place. That's why I love campaigning here. Each one of you is worth your weight in gold in terms of your impact on the direction of the country. That's why, how many presidential candidates have each of you seen? Go ahead and raise your hands, like 5, 10. You're the first. First? Oh, thanks, man. Thanks for saying hello to that. Yeah, 5, 10. 18? Oh, nice. So why are we all here over and over again? It's because we know the power that you have. It does not take that many of you to actually set this country off in a new direction. I'm actually going to take it a step further. It's a massive responsibility. It's an obligation. You have to take the country forward as quickly as possible so we can catch up to the changes in our society. And if you don't do this, then we are lost. We are stuck. We have another 4 years of the stores closing and the AI getting smarter and the self-trucks getting closer to the highways and the fast food restaurants becoming more and more mechanized. Like, it's all happening around us. We see it in our CVS and we saw it happen to the manufacturing plants, and now it's going to start ripping through the most common jobs in our society. So what starts out as relatively dramatic seeming actually becomes inevitable and necessary very, very quickly when you start digging into it. This is the vision of a trickle-up economy that you can make real as quickly as possible. And I'm going to say there's no one else to make it real. You are it. There's no other New Hampshire, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, if you're not into it, then we're going to go. No, I mean, it is you all. That's the joy of being here. Because I feel like when I'm here, for me, it's so much fun because I feel like I'm revisiting my adolescence, my past, because I went to high school here and the rest of it. But I also feel very strongly that the future is being made in rooms like this, in conversations like this. And the fact that the reality that you see around you is actually right. You know what I mean? And it's only just going to keep heading in this darker and darker direction unless we rewrite the rules. So this foundation is step one. Step two is actually changing the economic measurements correspond to what we are doing. So again, corporate profits records life expectancy going down. Which is more important? Like pretty obvious, right? Or if you're a parent, what's your name?
Yeah, like a bird.
No, so if you're a parent, then you know that how rent is doing is much, much more important than whatever the GDP number is. And you're not going to believe this, but we can actually upgrade our economic statistics instantaneously. As your president, I will go to the Bureau of Economic Analysis and say, hey, GDP, 100 years old, really out of date. And even the inventor of GDP 100 years ago said this is a terrible measurement of national well-being and we should never use it as that. And here we are 100 years later following it off a cliff. Robot trucks are great for GDP. They're going to be terrible for people. How many of you all have run a business or organization? Imagine if you had the wrong measurements for that organization. How's that organization going to do over time? Not well. That is where this country is right now. We're riding 3 measurements off a cliff. Those 3 measurements are GDP, stock market prices, and headline unemployment. So GDP I've talked about a little bit. Stock market prices, the bottom 80% of Americans own 8% of stock market wealth, and the bottom 50% zero. So why would you be trumpeting an fact 94% of new jobs are temp, gig, or contract jobs that don't have benefits, that 40% of recent college graduates, which I suspect resemble some of you in this room, I get like a young people vibe from the census, 40% of recent college graduates are doing a job that does not require a college degree, and that working 2 or 3 jobs is increasingly normal. I was just with a teacher who talked about how teachers regularly do a second job. I think that's actually the perfect measuring stick. If teachers have to work a second job, you are screwing up on a mammoth scale. 100 years old. We're going to update it to include our mental health and freedom from substance abuse, our childhood success rates, wellness and life expectancy. How about clean air and clean water? You can actually build economic sustainability into your measurements. And I was just talking to the editorial board over the Keene Sentinel about this. The tug of war on climate change, the real problem is the measurement problem. Because right now, if you go to an American, many Americans, unfortunately, you say, first, how many of y'all are worried about climate change? Yeah, that means it's a smart room. If you don't have your hand up, you probably should. That's another thing you probably should raise your hand for. So, a lot of Americans, unfortunately, when you say, hey, we need to address climate change, what they hear is higher cost, inconvenience, and fewer jobs. That's what they hear. And if 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, if you're living paycheck to paycheck and someone says to you, we need to fight climate change, a very natural reaction is to say, I can't pay next month's rent. I can't worry about 10 years from now. So the problem is a measurement problem because right now people think it, quote unquote, costs money to fight climate change. The truth is, you know what costs a lot of money? Cost of climate change, how many dollars is climate change going to cost us? Trillions, easy. And unfortunately, it's going to cost lives too. It's going to cost thousands of American lives. So if you factor in the cost of climate change or doing nothing, then all of a sudden, everything we do to invest in climate change actually helps improve our economic indicators. In economic terms, climate change is what's called an externality, which is something that's not being measured by the actual firm's numbers, but is out there. And so if you actually include the externality, then all of a sudden it changes all of your numbers very, very quickly. It means that if you're a fossil fuel company, instead of minting all this money, there's actually a massive cost associated with your emissions. So updating our measurements, it sounds kind of wonky and nerdy, but it's actually fundamental. And it puts an end to the tug of war that we're trapped in where you think, oh, like, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for this? And if there's one thing I want you to remember from this conversation tonight, the biggest lie in American life today is that we don't have the money. Do you remember anyone, first, do you remember voting for the $4 trillion bailout of Wall Street 10 years ago? No. Oh, you didn't vote for that? No. You didn't get like the, hey, do you want to do this? Do you remember them complaining where were we going to get the money to bail out Wall Street to the tune of $4 trillion? Do you remember that? Also, I was so horrified by what we did in the financial crisis. I quit my job and spent 7 years helping create thousands of jobs as the head of a nonprofit. Because I said, this is so corrupt, so venal, so immoral, that I actually need, I need to get away from this and try and demonstrate what we should be doing, on a human level. But there was never any complaint about where money came from, when Wall Street was concerned. And then when we're going around saying, look, we need the economy, the myth we're being sold is that we do not have the money. There's one thing you can remember from this conversation. We're the wealthiest, most advanced economy in the history of the world. We're up to $21 trillion in annual value. We can easily afford $1,000 a month for every American if we get the trillion-dollar tech companies like Amazon and the gang to pay their fair share. Especially because when the money's in our hands, it doesn't disappear. It just goes back into our economy, makes our businesses stronger, it makes our families healthier. That's the virtuous cycle of the trickle-up economy that you all can make real as quickly as possible. So I hope that this vision feels vital and compelling to you all, because that is the mission of this cycle, this campaign, 2020. We are decades behind the curve, and it has gone from being dangerous to catastrophic because the rate of change is picked up so fast and our government is so far behind the curve. And having spent some time in DC, it's even worse. Not only are they behind the curve, they are disconnected and they do not care. They don't, because the fact is if the people suffer, nothing happens to them. Their jobs do not change, their livelihoods do not shrink, their money does not disappear. They get paid no matter what. Most of the country looks up and sees our pipes clogged with money and they think they can do nothing about it. And they are correct, New Hampshire. They can do nothing about it, but you all can. You are the only ones who can. You came here on this wintry afternoon, you're like, oh man, this guy just gave me the future of the country. He said, it's up to me. It is up to you. We have to accelerate our economy and our society as quickly as possible to actually match up to the challenges of 2019 and 2020. Donald Trump said he was going to make America great again. And what did Hillary Clinton say in response?
America's already great.
America's already great. Remember that? That didn't work out. We have to acknowledge the reality and severity of the problems, and we need real solutions. What were Donald Trump's solutions? He said we're going to build a wall, we're going to turn the clock back, we're going to bring the old jobs back. New Hampshire, you know that we have to do the opposite of these things. We have to turn the clock forward. We have to accelerate our economy and society as quickly as possible. We have to evolve in the way we think about ourselves and our work and our value. And I'm the ideal candidate for that job because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes snacks. What does MAT stand for, New Hampshire?
Make America think harder.
Make America think harder. That's right. That is your job, New Hampshire. We got to make America see the real problems and advance real solutions. For those of you who are really into politics, raise your hand if you're really into politics. So if you're really into politics, you get a sense. This campaign is one of the only growth stories in the field, where we raised $750,000 2 days ago, just in one day. We raised $10 million last quarter in increments of only $30 each, so my fans are almost as cheap as Bernie's. This is a very cheap and wholesome gang to join. But there's zero corporate PAC money. This is purely grassroots, a movement of the people. The companies would not have sent me. I'm like a terrible emissary for them, you know what I mean? I'd be like, oh, let's send the random Asian guy no one's ever heard of. This'll work. I don't owe anyone anything. And I'm not running for president because I really had some deep-seated desire to be president. Because again, I'm not insane. I'm a parent, and I have seen the mess we are leaving for our kids, and it is not something I'm willing to accept. You shouldn't accept it either. You should, if you're a young person, you should be angry. And if you're a parent, you should be angry because we have left our kids such a disaster, such a shambles, and we have to knit it together and restore it as quickly as possible. It's going to take very big moves because we've let it disintegrate for years, for decades. But I'm purely going to do what I believe is the right thing. I don't owe anyone aside from my supporters that. And I know all my supporters just want me to do the right thing anyway. So this is the campaign that can rewrite the rules, but we need your help. And now what's the ask here? Really the ask is nothing more than just a vote and tell your friends. Because if you're here in New Hampshire, everyone you know is worth 1,000 people too. All your neighbors, all your friends, all your family members, you all have this magic power to you. And so if you someone and say, hey, I saw this guy speak, he was actually really interesting. You should, and then you make that connection, that actually is how the change occurs. It does not take that many of you to change the history of this country, and we need you to set us on a new way forward as quickly as possible. Thank you very much, Keene. We'd love to take your questions. Love it. Yeah, so questions, sure.
Yeah, so Native Americans in this country potentially have the most uncovered racism, being the group that's most likely to go without a reliable source of water or electricity. Reservations hold the highest levels of drug overdoses, domestic violence, and then hospitals and reservations have a colloquial phrase that's if you're going to get sick, you do it by the start of the year because we're not going to have money after June. So my question is, there's been a lot of, the only talk of the president in regards to Native Americans has been we're going to go right through Native American property with the wall. Your plans to make some reparations for Native Americans in the country, particularly those that make them have discrimination as opposed to other groups of people in the country.
When I was a kid, I grew up reading all these Native American biographies of chiefs. I don't know if anyone else did that. Is that a thing our kids still do? And they all seem to end the same way. So we certainly owe a massive debt to Native Americans that we displaced. And we should not be talking about them in terms of building a wall through their land, that's for sure. A lot of this is around trying to, again, gear our economy towards our own well-being, and that includes Native American populations if they'd like. And so instead of seeing keeping people strong and healthy as a cost, we should see it as an investment and something that's vital to our future. Some of my thinking around this freedom dividend is actually born of Native American communities, because there have been some Native American communities that have opened casinos, and they've taken that money and they've given it to their families. And in some ways, it's like a perfect XY study as to what happens when people get money around this level. And the data is so clear and compelling, where families get stronger and healthier, kids graduate from high school at higher levels, and as a parent, you'd appreciate this. The quality that they saw increase in Native American families that got money was something called conscientiousness. And you think of conscientiousness, what is that? It means that when you do something right, then good things happen, and if you don't do something right, then bad things happen. And in Native American households that didn't have this money, then they weren't conscientious because they did something right, nothing good happened. And so when they got the money, it actually made their kids more conscientious, which correlated to success in life. So I think we can learn something from at least some of these communities in the way they treat members of the tribe. But I would invest in those communities to try and get them up to the level of the entire country, and then try and move the entire country in the right direction. I like to go man, woman on this. So if there's any woman who has a question, that would be Grant. Oh, right there.
So I'm an accountant, and I really want to understand the value-added tax more, how that would work on corporations. And the second part of the question would be, it's really important to think about how we're going to raise revenue to pay for the things that we want to do in the community.
Yeah.
But I also want to know if there are any plans that you have to kind of trim the fat on government spending. I have a lot of family members that work for the government, and when I hear the stories about, needless spending that goes on and just poor financial decisions, like, renting the same building for 40 years when they could have owned it by that point, it just makes me a little crazy. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I love the CPA question, because she's like, you signed a 40-year lease on that building, you could have owned it for half the price. She sounds like a very good accountant. If anyone needs an accountant, you should probably go to her. She'd save you some money. I'll start with the government spending issue. I've run businesses and organizations, and to me, we've got both a revenue problem and an expense problem. So the revenue problem is you have trillion-dollar tech companies like Amazon siphoning off tens of billions of dollars of value and paying zero in taxes, and that cannot happen. And the number two, is there waste in our system? Of course, there's a ton of waste in our system. We spend trillions of dollars a year, and you know that there's a lot of waste in there. So you have to attack both problems, and so this is where the value-added tax comes in. If you saw a couple of the debates, I think 2 debates ago, I ended up getting in a little bit of a discussion with Elizabeth Warren about the wealth tax, because she's like, hey, if we ratchet up the wealth tax, we can pay for a lot of stuff. And I agree with the spirit of that, because we're in this extreme winner-take-all economy. But when you looked at other countries who implemented the wealth tax, Germany, France, Sweden, Denmark, they all repealed it because it did not generate the revenue they hoped it would, and there were massive compliance and implementation problems. And so I think the same would be true here in the US. The rich people in the US are not substantively different than the rich people in Sweden, Denmark, France, and Germany. But if you look at these other countries, they all have a value-added tax because they figured out that's a way to keep the Amazons of the world from getting, zero in taxes. So the way the value-added tax works, and one reason I love it so much, is that you can actually turn up the dial on things like artificial intelligence and yachts and luxury watches that you're like, yeah, like if you increase that value-added tax significantly, it's not as big a deal. And you could exempt or lighten it on things like diapers and toilet paper and eggs, like consumer staples that are actually the stuff of life. But even a conservative estimate of a value-added tax in the US, because our economy is up to 21 trillion, shows that you generate 800 billion or so in new revenue very quickly with even a mild value-added tax that's half the level of Europe. If there is a point in the expenditures I would target, it is the military-industrial complex. We're spending $700 billion a year or so on some things that are not making us substantively safer at this point. And so, to me, the obvious need in our economy is infrastructure. I would try and redirect some of the military defense spending towards infrastructure because it creates many of the similar types of jobs and has a much higher economic output over time. I love this CPA question. Yeah, sir.
Perhaps the most grievous example of klepto-capitalism is the immoral increase in cost in prescription medications. What is your plan to roll that back?
I think the most egregious example of klepto-capitalism is the opiate crisis, because that was initiated by drug companies that were profiting to the tune of billions of dollars, and it ended up still killing thousands of Americans every month, 8 Americans an hour. And so I agree with you that the drug companies are like almost a special category of firms in terms of the fact that they'll use economic incentives to justify reprehensible behavior. And there are many seniors who have to make impossible choices between rationing drugs and being able to pay for like rent or heat. So I've got a 4-part plan to bring down prescription drug prices very, very quickly. Number one, you maybe do believe this because you know how bad things are. The U.S. government is not allowed to negotiate for lower drug prices right now because the drug lobby is so powerful. They said, hey, can't negotiate lower drug prices. So that to me is like obvious move number one, say, of course we can negotiate lower drug prices. Number two, right now we pay 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much for drugs as citizens of other countries, even though we actually pay to develop the drugs. Isn't that the most messed up thing you've ever heard? They're like gouging us at the highest level. So one, we can negotiate for lower prices. Number two, you cannot charge us more than you charge citizens of other countries. That alone would actually save us hundreds of billions very, very quickly. Number three, if you cannot abide by 1 and 2, then we actually have the right to forcibly license your drug and manufacture it, which is number 4. And number 5, if you actually continue to abuse it, we actually can import drugs from other countries. So that would introduce price competition very, very quickly for the drug companies. Do you think this plan would work?
Yeah.
This is the only plan that would work because the drug companies only know one language. It's just money. It's just dollars and cents. Like, you can say, hey, do the right thing. Of course they're not going to do the right thing. They're just going to say, like, yeah, I'll just make as much money as I can and pay whatever fine you have. So if you make it so it actually hurts their profits, then it'll change their behavior very quickly. And I can already hear the lobbyists complaining. You know what they're going to complain about? They're going to say, President Yang, if you do this, then we're not going to have the money to invest in vital innovation and life-saving new drugs. And I'm going to say that is total nonsense because you don't invest in that stuff now. Because they don't. They used to have armies of PhDs in labs trying to come up with new compounds, but they decided that was too hard. So they stopped doing it. Now the way they get their new compounds is they wait for a startup to develop the drug, and then when it gets to the FDA pipeline, they buy it for 40 cents on the dollar, and then they make the money on the difference. So I will say that it's like, look, if your profit margins come down, it will have zero impact on the pipeline of innovative new drugs. And I know this in part because a friend of mine actually dug through the numbers. I'm a numbers guy. I'm like, I should be friends with you. You're a numbers person too. So we have, if you're not a numbers person, I want to be friends with you too. Don't get me wrong. There are people who wear math hats who hate math. Yeah.
Like my whole life.
But a friend of mine who's a numbers person went through the drug company's numbers and was like, this is insane how much they're profiteering and price gouging. She said it was so nuts that she actually is betting against the stocks of those companies, and then she donated my campaign to make it right because she's an American and she said this is totally unconscionable. So that's how we get the drug prices under control. You just have to meet force with force because they know no other language but the bottom line. One other question. Yes.
This is a very unsexy question. You're utterly likable, utterly convincing. You're humanizing all of these issues in a very real way here in person. Do you have a plan for the next time that you're on a debate stage? Yes. To get more time on camera and to humanize these issues in the same way, to get the rest of the people to see how deeply you have thought about some of these issues, because I think there is tens of thousands of people in this country who still think of you just as the minimum wage guy,
The free money guy.
Yeah. They think of you as a $1,000 guy, and they don't know about, your stance on, like you're talking about the ratio of truck drivers
to virtual truck drivers. You're talking about, you know, the drug companies. You're talking about Silicon Valley keeping their kids off screens. You're humanizing all of these issues in a very real way here with us. But most of the country hasn't heard you do that.
Oh, I agree. Well, thank you. I mean, there's implicit praise in that. So I felt like it was quite sexy as a question. That'll be another lesson from tonight. It's like, apparently that's like the categories. I'm happy to say that our impact on the debate stage has not corresponded to airtime, where there was a debate where I spoke the least and we raised the most of any candidate and had the most website traffic and everything else. And I think that we're going to get more airtime in this coming debate, in part because of the organizations that are calling it. And one thing I've been blown away by is that the journalists have a significant amount of influence as to the shape of the debate. As the field shrinks too, we're going to get more and more time. As you probably know, that it's like a couple of candidates are going to drop out. So what we're doing, we think, will work as long as we keep taking advantage of the opportunities we have as the field shrinks. And one of the pieces of guidance I've gotten is that it's only after you gain a certain level of stature as a candidate that you're allowed to contrast yourself more heavily with other candidates. Because other than that, it seems sort of like you're just sort of like throwing rocks at someone above you. The goal now is to get on even footing and then really differentiate me from the other candidates. But thank you for the opportunity, because the debates have been a tremendous upside play for us every single time, but we know we can do more. So thank you. All right, let's make it fast.
Okay, yeah, 2 quick ones.
Then we'll do some selfies.
So freedom dividend, as president, how often would you revisit what the actual monthly?
Oh, it's
payment was?
it's pinned to inflation.
Into inflation, okay.
So it'd be like 1,000 the first year, and then probably like 1,020 the second, assuming 2% inflation.
And then would you put anything in motion to guarantee that for Ren when she, hits working age and, long beyond the Yang presidency?
Well, one of the things I'm so excited about is that when they put the oil dividend in Alaska, in effect 40 years ago, I want you to imagine, like, after the dividend goes out, it's going to be your favorite thing that the government does. In Alaska, oh really? like what else is going to be on the list? It'll be like, let's see, I like that dividend. What else do I like? So in Alaska, they love the dividend so much that a majority of Alaskans say they would accept higher taxes to fund the dividend. And Alaskans are not exactly a pro-tax population. So after we put the dividend in place, it's going to be the favorite thing that we all do, and then Ren is going to be in a great position to enjoy it when she comes of age. So a couple things, one, it's impossible to teach financial literacy to someone who does not have money. You try it, it's a total waste of time. And two, imagine a country where you get $1,000 a month starting at age 18, and then you get a financial literacy course senior in high school, right before you start getting the check. Do you think Ren's going to pay attention to that class? No. I think she will, because she'll be like, wait a minute, I'm actually getting this money. And then we'll make citizenship mean something in this country. We'll be able to look our kids in the eyes and say, your country loves you, your country values you, and you will be all right. Right now we tell the kids, hey, you can vote. And here in New Hampshire, that's actually very important. But a lot of the rest of the country, they're like, I can vote. That doesn't seem that cool. But when so I've run organizations, and there are 3 things you can do for people. Number 1, you do nothing, and then they leave you. Number 2, you tell them how great they are, and that works for about 2 years, and then they leave you. Number 3, you give them a raise. It's the only thing that works. We have to give we have to give the American people a raise. We're going to give Ren a raise. Thank you all so much. Let's take some pictures. Thank you, New Hampshire. Let's do it. Let's make some history. All right. It's selfie time. I guess we're not going to do it on this booth because that's way too high. I'm just going to come down here. Just like this. There you go, sir.
Thank you to everyone that donated while he was speaking.
Thank you.
We couldn't talk.
We can't talk when he's talking, so thank you very much. We appreciate the knowledge to come in. Y'all, we're working hard for you. We got one more live stream coming for you.
And it is snowing like crazy out there right now.
It is snowing like crazy, and it's going to take us over an hour to get there. Okay, so we're going to go ahead. We're going to end this live stream pretty quick. We're going to get the equipment loaded up. We'll probably get a little bit of footage while we're here. This was a very different,
Yeah, there was a stump speech. And
it was
he
a
added a
stump
lot.
speech, but there was like so much new stuff, man. There was so much new stuff. It was really incredible. So we thank you guys. Thank you so much. Easy Cruise and all y'all who were in the chats telling everybody how much we appreciated it. We do. Thank you so much. Y'all, we will see y'all in about a little over an hour. We're going to get to the next one. We love you, Yang Gang. Oh, wait, look. Hold on.